A mother lost her daughter and decided to say goodbye to her in an unusual way. She hid a camera in her coffin to preserve her last memories, but what she saw on the tape at night turned her grief into a real horror. Subscribe and tell me where you're watching this video from. The morning sun streamed through the large bay windows of the master bedroom, casting warm rays across the neatly made bed. The air smelled of fresh coffee and lavender from the diffuser on the nightstand, a subtle, calming routine that kept the chaos of life at bay. Monica sat by the vanity mirror, brushing her smooth dark hair, her eyes catching the reflection of the family photo beside her. She and Lila, her 10-year-old daughter, smiled brightly at the camera from a summer vacation 2 years ago. No father in the frame. There never had been. The house was a testament to Monica's determination. A sprawling, modern design with clean lines and soft, earth-toned walls. Every piece of furniture told a story of her triumph, from the minimalist gray sofa she had chosen after closing her first big real estate deal to the hardwood dining table she had purchased after receiving her broker's license. The road to this success had been anything but easy. Monica had clawed her way up from a life defined by struggle, heartbreak, and single motherhood, determined that Lila would never know the hardship she had endured. From downstairs came the familiar clatter of dishes, accompanied by the soft hum of music. Lila. Monica's heart warmed. Her daughter always tried to help in the mornings, even if it meant more mess than progress. Monica descended the staircase, the cool wood smooth under her bare feet. The open-concept kitchen welcomed her with the scent of buttered toast and slightly burnt eggs. Lila stood on her tiptoes at the counter, her dark curls bouncing as she carefully spread jam on the toast. She was wearing her favorite purple hoodie, the one with the faded unicorn that Monica had bought her for her 8th birthday. "Good morning, Chef," Monica greeted with a smile, leaning against the counter. Lila turned with a grin, her face smeared with a dab of strawberry jam. "Morning, Mom. I made breakfast. Well, almost. The eggs didn't survive." Monica chuckled softly and ruffled her daughter's curls. "It's perfect. Toast and jam are all I need." They sat together at the small breakfast nook, bathed in the soft morning light. For a few quiet moments, the world felt right. Monica's phone buzzed on the counter, but she ignored it. Work could wait. These moments with Lila, these were the ones that truly mattered. As they finished, Lila looked up with bright eyes. "Can we play that escape room game tonight? The new one on my tablet?" Monica smiled, wiping a bit of jam from Lila's cheek. "If I finish work early, it's a date." Lila grinned and jumped up from her seat, already grabbing her backpack. "Deal." Minutes later, Monica watched from the front porch as the yellow school bus pulled away, carrying her world with it. She felt the usual pang of separation, but also the quiet pride that Lila was growing into a smart, curious, and kind-hearted girl. She turned back inside, the silence of the house wrapping around her like a familiar shawl. Monica's drive to work was smooth, the city skyline shimmering against a bright sky. Her real estate office was on the 20th floor of a sleek glass tower, a space that represented her victories and her sacrifices. Inside, she was greeted by her assistant, Kara, a young woman with an efficient demeanor and a warm smile. "Morning, Monica. You've got a 10 a.m. with the Kingsleys about their listing and an inquiry from the Chapmans about the lakefront property. Oh, and—" Kara paused, eyes twinkling. "There's a bouquet on your desk." Monica's brows lifted in surprise. She stepped into her office, and there it was, a vase overflowing with soft cream roses and baby's breath. A small card peeked from the blooms. She plucked it out, her lips curving as she read the familiar handwriting. Just because. Can't wait for dinner. A warmth that had once felt foreign now felt like home. Adam. Their story had begun half a year ago in the most unexpected way. Monica had been dealing with a fraudulent client attempting to back out of a high-stakes deal. Panic had threatened her composure until Adam had stepped in. A private investigator hired by the title company, he had resolved the situation with sharp intellect and calm authority. Monica had been impressed. He had been intrigued. Their connection had sparked naturally, evolving from professional exchanges to deep conversations over coffee, then wine, then everything. Adam was different. With his easy charm, rugged good looks, and a quiet confidence honed from years in his line of work, he had managed to slip past the fortress she had built around her heart. But what truly endeared him to her was his kindness toward Lila. Monica's mind drifted to their first meeting with Lila, a simple dinner that had ended with a makeshift scavenger hunt Adam created on the spot to entertain her daughter. Lila had adored it, and soon she adored Adam. It was a connection Monica hadn't expected but welcomed. Despite her cautious nature, despite her past betrayals, Monica found herself letting Adam deeper into her world. He listened without judgment when she spoke of her struggles. He never made her feel lesser for her scars. With him, she felt seen, not as the successful realtor or the resilient single mother, but as Monica, the woman who sometimes still felt small beneath the weight of her past. The months that followed had been blissful. Adam had become more than a lover. He had become a part of their lives, their routines. He taught Lila how to ride her bike without training wheels, cooked Sunday breakfasts that filled the house with laughter, and shared quiet evenings with Monica where the world seemed to fade away. Monica had always been cautious with her heart. Men had come and gone, most of them drawn more to her success than to her soul. But Adam was different. He had his own success, running a thriving investigative firm. He never asked for anything, except her trust. And so, when he suggested moving in, she had said yes. Now, their home was no longer just her achievement, it was their haven. Layla had taken to calling Adam her almost dad in moments of joy, and Monica felt her heart both swell and ache at the tenderness of it. The workday passed in a blur of contracts and calls, and by early evening, Monica was back home, greeted by the comforting hum of domestic life. Layla, sprawled on the living room floor, was engrossed in her tablet, her lips moving as she strategized through her game. The scent of garlic and rosemary wafted from the kitchen, Adam cooking as usual. Monica slipped off her heels and padded into the kitchen. Adam, in jeans and a worn t-shirt, was at the stove, his profile warm and familiar. He glanced over, his face lighting up. "Hey, you," he said, wiping his hands on a towel before pulling her into a brief, soft kiss. "Dinner's almost ready. Chicken marsala, your favorite." Monica smiled, her body relaxing into his. "You spoil me. You deserve it," he replied simply. After dinner, as promised, Monica joined Layla for the escape room game. Their laughter filled the room as they raced against the virtual clock, solving puzzles together. Adam watched from the couch, a soft smile on his lips, and in that moment, everything felt perfectly aligned. As night settled over their home, Monica felt a rare and beautiful contentment. She had built her life with determination and grit, but love, real, unexpected love, had found its way in. And for once, she allowed herself to believe that the hardest days were behind her. But she was wrong. The day began as unremarkably as any other, with the comforting hum of routine threading through the morning air. Monica prepared breakfast while Layla dashed around the house, gathering her school supplies. Adam, dressed sharply for a client meeting, kissed Monica's cheek and ruffled Lila's curls before grabbing his keys. "See you tonight, ladies," he said with a wink, his voice carrying the warmth that had so effortlessly become part of their home. Lila waved dramatically. "Don't forget, you promised to help me with my science project." Adam grinned. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, kiddo." The school bus rumbled up the street, and with one last hug, Lila was off, her laughter lingering in the crisp morning air as the bus doors closed. Monica stood on the porch, waving, her heart full and peaceful. But peace is a fragile thing. Monica was in the middle of a property consultation when her phone buzzed sharply, the screen flashing the school's name. Her chest tightened. A school call during class hours rarely meant anything good. "Mrs. Green," came the tense voice of the school nurse. "You need to come immediately. It's Lila. She collapsed during class. An ambulance is on the way to St. Mark's Hospital." The blood drained from Monica's face. What happened? She was conscious for a moment, but in pain. Chest pain. "We're not sure, but the medics are doing everything they can. Please hurry." Monica's world blurred. The call ended, and she barely remembered rushing from the office, her heart pounding in time with the desperate screech of her tires as she sped toward the hospital. When she burst through the emergency room doors, her eyes darted wildly, searching for any sign of her daughter. The air smelled of antiseptic and fear. Then she saw him, Adam. He was already there, his face pale and tight with worry. "She's inside," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I got here as soon as they called." Monica's knees weakened. "What happened?" Adam shook his head. "They said, her heart, it just—" Before he could finish, a doctor emerged from the trauma room. His face, a mask of weary compassion, sent Monica's heart crashing. "Mrs. Green?" His voice was measured, but Monica could hear the heaviness beneath it. "I'm Dr. Halston. I'm so sorry." The world tilted. "No." Monica's voice was barely a whisper, trembling and raw. "No. She was fine this morning." The doctor's expression softened with familiar sorrow. "It was sudden. A cardiac event. We did everything we could, but—" Her heart stopped. "I'm so sorry for your loss." The words shattered against her ribs, sharp and unbearable. Monica's legs buckled, and Adam caught her, holding her as a raw, broken wail tore from her chest. Her baby, her everything, gone. The hours that followed blurred into a hollow fog. The hospital room where Lila lay was too still. Monica felt like she was drowning, suffocating on the silence where there should have been giggles, questions, and joy. Lila's hand, still warm, rested in hers, a hand that had once clutched hers tightly on the first day of school, on nights after bad dreams, on Sunday mornings filled with pancakes and cartoons. Adam stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, a steady presence in the hurricane of her grief. When the staff finally, gently led her away, Monica felt as if they were tearing her heart from her chest. That night, Adam sat with her in their darkened living room. The house felt wrong, too empty, too cold. Monica stared blankly at the untouched condolence flowers someone had sent, lilies pristine and lifeless. Adam broke the silence, his voice hesitant but gentle. I've been thinking about the funeral. I can handle the arrangements. You shouldn't have to—" Monica flinched at the word, her voice cracking. "Funeral?" He squeezed her hand. "I know it's fast, but maybe it's better this way. Linger too long, and the pain, it becomes unbearable." She turned to him, her eyes hollow and shining with agony. She's She's only been gone a day." Adam's expression was pained, but his voice remained soft, reasonable. I want to protect you from more suffering. She deserves peace, Monica, and so do you." The logic was cruel but sound, and Monica, dazed, drowning in a grief so vast it swallowed her thoughts, nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely hers. "But I need to see her once more. Tomorrow." Adam's face softened with relief. "Of course, whatever you need." The decision made, a numbness crept over her, a shield against the unbearable. But beneath it, a whisper of something else, something uneasy. She couldn't name it, couldn't touch it, not through the weight of her sorrow. The following day, at the funeral home, Monica stood beside the small white casket. The air was thick with the sterile scent of roses and polished wood. Lila's face, soft and peaceful, looked as if she were simply sleeping. Her favorite stuffed bear, a plush, worn little thing, rested beside her, tucked under her still hand. Monica's breath shuddered. "Hi, my little star," she whispered, her voice splintering under the weight of grief. I brought you something, so you'll never be alone." With trembling hands, Monica placed a new plush toy, a teddy bear with soft brown fur, beside her daughter. But this bear was different. Hidden within its button eye was a tiny camera, its lens small and invisible. Connected to an app on Monica's phone, the camera would let her stay close, watch over Lila. She knew it was irrational, foolish even, but the thought of complete separation was unbearable. Adam entered quietly, his footsteps soft against the carpet. "Are you sure you want?" Monica's voice was brittle but firm. I need this, just for a while." Adam said nothing, only wrapped an arm around her shoulder. She didn't see his expression, didn't catch the flicker of something beneath his eyes. Concern? Unease? It passed too quickly. The funeral itself was mercifully brief. Monica scarcely heard the words spoken, words of remembrance, of love, of loss. The world had narrowed to a single point, the descent of the casket into the earth. The earth closed over her child, and with it, something within Monica closed too. But the unease, that whisper of something wrong, it didn't leave. It lingered, cold and unseen, beneath the crushing grief. And that night, in the suffocating quiet of their home, it would find a voice. The house felt hollow. The warmth, the laughter, the heartbeat of their home, gone, buried beneath the earth with Lila. Monica moved through the rooms like a shadow of herself, her body present, but her spirit shattered. Every corner held a memory, Lila's sneakers still by the door, her tablet on the couch where she had last played their escape game, her room untouched, frozen in time. The funeral had ended, but for Monica, it felt like the world had simply stopped. Sleep was a foreign concept. Her body, heavy with exhaustion, refused to surrender, and when she did drift into fitful dreams, they were filled with Lila's voice, soft cries, laughter, and sometimes something else, something that felt more like a call for help. Adam, ever steady, stayed by her side. He managed the logistics, fielded the condolences, and shielded her from the cold administrative tasks that followed death. His care was constant, warm meals placed before her, gentle reminders to rest, his arm around her shoulders when the sobs broke through. Yet, despite his attentiveness, Monica felt isolated, as if her grief existed in a place he couldn't reach. But there was something else beneath her sorrow, something that gnawed at the edges of her consciousness, a whisper of unease. She couldn't place it. It was absurd. There was no mystery in death. It was cruel and cold and final. And yet, the idea came to her in the middle of the night. Restless and raw, Monica found herself scrolling through old videos of Layla on her phone. Birthday parties, silly dances, whispered good nights before bed. She craved to hear her daughter's voice again, to see her move, to feel, if only through a screen, that Layla was still somewhere, somehow, close. Then her thumb hovered over a security app, the one connected to their home's cameras. A thought, wild and desperate, flickered to life. She couldn't be with Layla anymore, but what if she could still watch over her? Her heart pounded as the idea took shape. A camera, something small, discreet, not to spy, no. She knew how it sounded, how insane it was, but the thought of utter silence, of knowing nothing, that was worse. She couldn't let go. Not yet. By dawn, the decision was made. The electronics store felt like another world, sterile and bright, a stark contrast to the fog of her grief. The clerk, a young man with a nervous smile, listened patiently to her unusual request. Well, he began, flipping open a box. This model's popular for nurseries. Motion-activated, cloud storage, and really discreet. He held up a small plush teddy bear, soft and innocent, with a single glossy button eye. The camera's hidden here. It streams directly to your phone through an app. Monica's heart clenched. A nanny cam? The boy nodded. Yeah, great for peace of mind. Peace of mind. Such a hollow phrase. She bought it. She didn't need to explain why. She wouldn't have been able to. That evening, in the dim light of the funeral home, Monica stood before Layla's small white coffin. The air smelled of roses and wood polish, and the silence pressed down like a weight. Layla looked so peaceful, her face soft in repose, her little hands holding her old plush bear, the one that had been her favorite since infancy. Monica's voice trembled. "My sweet girl," she whispered, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. I brought you something new, a little friend. So you'll never be alone." With shaking fingers, she placed the new teddy bear beside the old one, carefully tucking it under Layla's arm. The camera, hidden in the glossy button eye, was already live, connected to Monica's phone. She could almost feel it watching, recording this final, unbearable moment. She lingered, her heart splintering anew. "I love you," she breathed, her voice barely audible. I need to know you're okay, even if I can't be with you." A presence beside her. Adam. His hand found her back, warm and steady. "Monica?" His voice was soft, careful. "Are you sure you want to do this?" She didn't look at him, her gaze locked on her daughter's still face. "I have to," she replied, her voice brittle. "I know it's irrational, but I need to feel close to her. Just a little longer." Adam's silence stretched, heavy and unreadable. Then, after a beat, his thumb rubbed a small comforting circle against her spine. "Okay," he said simply. "If it helps you, then okay." Monica felt his acceptance in those words, but something in his voice, some fleeting tension, didn't sit right. But she was too raw, too shattered to question it. The lid closed, the coffin was sealed, and with it, a piece of Monica's soul. That night, the house was an ocean of shadows. Monica lay curled on Layla's bed, her phone clutched in her palm. She had opened the camera feed, but turned the screen face down. She couldn't look. Not yet. The thought alone, the knowledge that a piece of her, however distant, was still with Layla, was both a balm and a torment. Adam found her there hours later, his voice low and laced with concern. "Monica, you should rest. Our beds—" "I can't," she rasped, her voice cracked from crying. "I can't leave her room. Not yet." A sigh, then the bed shifted as he sat beside her. "I understand," he murmured, his hand smoothing over her back. "Take your time. I'm here." But as he sat with her in the dark, Monica's phone buzzed. Just once. A small notification from the app. Signal connected. Camera active. Her fingers twitched around the device, but she didn't turn it over. Not tonight. Tomorrow, she told herself, tomorrow she would be ready. But the whisper inside her, the same one that had pushed her to place that camera, already knew. Tomorrow would come. And with it, something she would never be ready for. The night was thick with silence, the kind that felt unnatural, heavy, and wrong. Monica lay stiffly in Lila's bed, her body curled beneath the soft quilt that still smelled faintly of her daughter, lavender shampoo and the sweetness of childhood. The stuffed animals around her felt like sentinels, watching over the space their owner would never return to. Her phone, clutched tightly in her palm, vibrated once more. The notification pulsed against the dark screen. Liv, Bearcam, signal connected. Her breath hitched. She hadn't yet opened the feed. All day, she had found reasons not to. Grief, exhaustion, fear, though she couldn't explain what exactly she was afraid of. She had wanted this, hadn't she? To be close to Lila, even if only through a screen. Her thumb hovered, and then, with a breathless whisper, "I love you, baby," she tapped the screen. The image loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, until the feed was clear. The view was still, narrow, and dim, cast in shades of gray from the night vision lens. Layla's small, peaceful form filled most of the frame, the soft fabric of her dress motionless, her tiny hands cradling her old bear. The satin lining of the coffin framed her like a fragile doll in a velvet box. Monica's throat tightened, and her chest felt like it was caving inward. She had known what she would see. But the finality of it, the stillness, was a fresh wound. Tears burned hot down her cheeks as she whispered brokenly, "I'm here, sweet girl. Mommy's here." Hours passed. The feed remained unchanged. Only the soft flicker of the camera timestamp marked the progression of time. Monica watched until her eyes ached, until the shapes on the screen blurred into shadows. Sleep claimed her eventually, but it was thin and restless. The phone slipped from her fingers, landing beside her on the mattress. A sharp noise dragged her from sleep. Scratch. The sound was faint, distant, like fabric against wood. At first, Monica thought it was part of her dream, some phantom echo from her mind's tortured landscape, but then, scratch, scratch. Her eyes snapped to the phone. The live feed was still open, and on the screen, a flicker of movement. Her pulse turned to ice. She sat bolt upright, her vision sharpening on the image. At first, she thought it was a glitch, some digital error or interference, but it wasn't. The bear, the one in Layla's arms, it shifted. The movement was small but unmistakable. Her heart pounded violently, and her breath came in shallow gasps. "No," she whispered, her voice barely a thread of sound. "No, that's not possible." But it was. The bear's tiny paw, a soft, stuffed limb, was moving, jerking, and then, from somewhere within the feed, faint but clear, a sound, a breath, a shallow, strained breath. Monica's vision blurred as cold panic flooded her veins. She clutched the phone with trembling hands, her thumb fumbling for the volume button, and then, a voice, so soft, so weak. "Mommy." The word, that word, struck her like a physical blow. It was impossible, unthinkable, and yet, it was Layla. "Layla!" The scream tore from her throat as her body lurched upright, the phone rattling in her grip. On the screen, the camera flickered slightly, and Lila's tiny hand, pale and trembling, brushed against the bear, her fingers moving. Her voice, so faint, so strained, whispered again. "Mommy, it's dark. Mommy, help me." The phone crashed to the floor as Monica exploded from the bed, her scream raw and feral, tearing from her soul. She was already running, barefoot, half blind with panic, before her conscious mind caught up with her body. "Lila!" she shrieked, her voice cracking as she scrambled for her car keys, her hands shaking so violently they slipped twice before she managed to seize them. The front door slammed against the wall as she burst into the cold night, her bare feet slapping against the pavement. The car roared to life beneath her trembling hands, tires screeching as she peeled away from the curb. Her mind was a cyclone of terror and confusion. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the sound of Lila's voice still rang in her ears, and the image of her child moving in the coffin was seared into her brain. The cemetery felt a lifetime away, each second a cruel eternity. She called 911 with shaking fingers, her voice a desperate, splintered plea. "This is an emergency. My daughter is alive. She was buried today, but she's alive. You need to send help, now." The dispatcher's voice tried to soothe her, to extract information, but Monica was beyond coherence. Her world had narrowed to one thing: get to Lila. Get to her now. The gates to the cemetery were closed for the night, but Monica's foot never lifted from the gas. The car plowed through, the iron gates screeching against the frame as they crumpled aside. The vehicle fishtailed, headlights bouncing wildly over rows of gravestones. Then, the plot. Lila's grave, fresh earth, cruel and undisturbed. Monica was out of the car before it fully stopped, her body hitting the ground with a stumble. She clawed at the earth with bare hands, screaming her daughter's name, her nails splitting, her skin scraping raw against the rough dirt. In the distance, sirens wailed, a mournful, approaching cry. The police. Paramedics. "Help! Help me!" she shrieked, her voice shredding as her hands bled. "She's in there! She's alive!" Blue and red lights splashed across the night as officers and emergency responders rushed toward her. Strong arms grabbed her, pulling her back from the grave, but she fought them with the strength of pure, primal desperation. "Get off me!" she roared, thrashing. "Dig! Dig her out!" The urgency in her voice, the raw, broken agony, made the officers pause. Then the crackling voice of the dispatcher echoed from their radios. "Units on scene. Caller reports possible live individual in Plot 7. Proceed with caution. Medics en route." The officer in charge barked orders. "Get the tools. Move!" Shovels struck earth. The sound, metal against soil, was unbearable. Too slow, too loud. Then, a dull thunk. "Coffin!" someone shouted. The bolts of the coffin were wrenched open, the lid lifted, and there, Lila, pale, weak, her lips bluish, but moving. Her eyelids fluttered, her tiny voice, barely a whisper. "Mommy! Lila!" Monica screamed, her body convulsing as she wrenched forward, hands reaching. The paramedics moved fast, lifting the frail child from the coffin and onto a gurney. An oxygen mask descended over Lila's face as their hands worked, voices barking vitals and orders. But Lila's eyes, glassine, half-lidded, found Monica. "Mommy, you found me!" Monica collapsed to her knees, her entire body shaken. "I'm here, baby," she sobbed. "I'm here! I'll never leave you, never!" The medics shouted to each other, heart rate stabilizing, shallow breathing, severe hypoxia. They rushed Lila to the ambulance, Monica stumbling at their side, her hand clasped in her daughter's fragile fingers. As the doors closed, Monica's bloodied hand squeezed Lila's weak one, and she whispered, through tears that tasted like salt and salvation, "I've got you, my little star. Mommy's here. I've got you." The ambulance wailed into the night, carrying them toward the unknown, but Monica didn't care. Her daughter, her heart, was alive. The ambulance tore through the night, sirens screaming, the red and blue lights slicing the darkness. Inside, Monica sat rigid beside the gurney where Lila lay, her small body fragile beneath the tangle of wires and tubes. The harsh, antiseptic smell of the ambulance mixed with the metallic tang of blood, Monica's blood, from her raw, dirt-torn hands. But she felt nothing. Her world was narrowed to the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor and the pale, almost translucent face of her daughter. "Stay with me, baby," Monica whispered, her voice splintering from exhaustion and terror. She clutched Lila's limp hand, her own trembling with the weight of fear. "Stay with me. I'm here. I'm here." A paramedic, his hands steady but his face tight with urgency, called out numbers to his partner. "BP 70/40, pulse weak, hypoxic, get the mask tighter." The other medic adjusted the oxygen mask snug over Lila's small face. "She's critical, but she's fighting," he said, his voice tense but steady. "We're almost there." Lila's lips, faintly blue, parted under the mask. Her eyes, dull and unfocused, flickered open just a sliver. "Mommy!" Her voice was a breath, barely audible through the mask, but it hit Monica like a thunderclap. "I'm here, sweetheart." Monica's voice broke, her face crumpling. "I've got you. You're safe. Just, hold on, baby." Lila's tiny fingers fluttered weakly against her mother's. Then her eyes slipped shut again. The heart monitor beeped, erratic. The paramedic's voice sharpened. "She's crashing. Come on, kid. Stay with us." "No!" Monica's scream was raw, primal. She felt her soul unraveling with every unstable beep of the machine. The driver's voice cut through the panic. 2 minutes out. Push epi, now." The paramedic's hands moved swiftly, injecting life into Lila's failing heart. A heartbeat. Weak, but there. The monitor stabilized. Monica's chest heaved, her nails digging into her palms. She was trembling, every nerve stretched to breaking. But her daughter, her miracle, was still here. The ER was a whirlwind of motion and chaos. The second the ambulance doors burst open, the medical team descended, their voices a sharp symphony of orders and urgency. 10-year-old female. Severe hypoxia. Prolonged enclosure. Possible trauma. Cardiac event unknown origin. Monica tried to follow, but a nurse caught her by the shoulders, firm but kind. "Ma'am, we need you to wait outside." "No!" Monica's voice cracked, her body fighting against the hands pulling her back. "She needs me. Her knees buckled, the world spinning. She was collapsing into a black tunnel when strong arms caught her. "Monica!" The familiar voice pierced the haze. "Adam." Suddenly, she was pressed against his chest, his arms holding her upright. His voice, warm and low, reached her through the madness. "I've got you. I'm here. Let them work." Monica's body shook uncontrollably, but her voice was sharp with desperation. "She's alive. Adam, she was alive in that coffin." Her words were frantic, trembling. "I heard her. I saw her. She called for me." Adam's hand cradled her face, his eyes searching hers, wide with shock. I know, baby. We'll figure it out. Just breathe." But Monica couldn't breathe. Not without Lila. Minutes felt like lifetimes. Finally, a doctor emerged, his scrubs streaked with adrenaline and urgency. "Mrs. Green." His voice was steady but guarded. Monica surged forward. "Is she? How is she?" The doctor's expression was tight, but there was a glint of something. Hope. She's stable. Critical, but stable. We've placed her on a ventilator. Severe hypoxia caused damage, but it's too early to assess the extent. The next 24 hours are crucial. Monica's knees gave, and Adam caught her once more. Relief and terror tangled in her chest. "Can I see her?" she choked. The doctor nodded. Briefly, but only you for now. The ICU was cold, the air thick with the hum of machines. Lila lay so small in the hospital bed, wires snaking from her frail body, the ventilator's soft hiss marking each breath. The sight of her, so broken, so battered, felt like a knife through Monica's ribs. She sank into the chair beside the bed, her trembling fingers brushing a stray curl from Lila's forehead. "Hi, my sweet star," she whispered, her voice shattered glass. "Mommy's here. You're so strong, baby. You're the bravest girl I've ever known." Tears slid unchecked down her cheeks, splashing onto the white sheets. "I heard you, Lila," she sobbed softly. "You called for me, and I found you. I swear, I'll never let anything hurt you again." Layla's hand, small and bandaged, rested beneath Monica's, motionless but warm. Warm. Alive. Hours passed, the room cloaked in a heavy, sterile silence. Adam sat beside her, his hand on her shoulder, a constant, grounding presence. But Monica's mind was restless, circling the impossible. "Adam," she said suddenly, her voice hoarse but edged with something new, suspicion. They said it was a heart attack, sudden cardiac death." Her throat tightened. "But she wasn't. She wasn't dead." Adam's voice was careful. "She must have been in some kind of deep coma. The doctors said it can mimic death, especially with hypoxia." "No," Monica's voice sharpened. "I felt it. Something's wrong." Her eyes, raw and burning, turned to him. "They declared her dead, Adam. They buried her. But she wasn't dead." Adam's jaw tensed. "The doctors said it's rare, but it happens." Monica shook her head violently, her voice rising, cracking. "No, this wasn't a mistake. Someone, put her there." Her eyes glistened with a sudden, terrible clarity. "And I'm going to find out who." Her phone, forgotten in her bag, suddenly buzzed with a notification. Bearcam, new recording uploaded. Monica's blood turned to ice. The camera, it had kept recording. Her shaking fingers unlocked the screen. The feed from the bear, the last moments inside the coffin, loaded. The image was dim, grainy, the timestamp, minutes before she arrived at the cemetery, and then movement. A shadow, a hand, an adult hand, pressed briefly against the camera's view, and a voice. Familiar, smooth, warm, but cold. "You'll sleep now, little one. It's better this way. Just close your eyes." Monica's breath stopped. Her stomach dropped into a black, bottomless void, because the voice was Adam's. Monica stared at the phone screen, her fingers frozen, her breath shallow and uneven. The voice played again, looping in her mind, each syllable carving a new fracture into her soul. It was unmistakable. The low, soothing cadence, the gentle murmur wrapped in something far darker. Adam. The man who had held her through her worst nightmares. The man who had whispered promises into her ear, who had helped Layla with her homework, who had laughed with them over burnt pancakes on Sunday mornings. Her stomach twisted violently, her body recoiling as if the device in her hand had burned her. She shut her eyes tightly, willing herself to breathe, to think, to not fall apart. But the image of the hand brushing against the camera lens was seared into her mind. A hand she had held, a hand she had trusted. Her pulse pounded against her ribs, her mind screaming for her to do something, to act, but her body refused to move. Across the room, Adam sat beside Lila's hospital bed, his expression the perfect mask of concern. His fingers grazed Lila's hand, his other palm resting lightly on Monica's shoulder as if he could sense her unraveling. Monica forced herself to stay still, to keep breathing, to not react. She swallowed the bile rising in her throat and pressed the phone against her thigh, shutting off the screen, her mind racing. She needed proof. She needed to be sure. She needed to get away from him. Slowly, carefully, she turned her head toward Adam. His expression was unreadable, but when he looked at her, his eyes softened, full of practiced empathy. "You should get some rest," he said, his voice low and gentle, his fingers brushing lightly against her back. "You haven't slept since—" Monica forced herself to nod, to keep her breathing steady, to keep the terror from showing on her face. "You're right," she murmured, her voice quieter than usual, barely above a whisper. "I just need a moment." Adam nodded, his gaze warm, his hand lingering a second too long before pulling away. "I'll stay with her. You know, I'll take care of everything." Her skin crawled. Monica forced herself to rise slowly, to move like the grief-stricken mother he thought she was, to not let the panic show in the way her muscles tensed. She tucked the phone into her pocket, her fingers clenched so tightly her knuckles ached. She turned toward the door, her breath steady, her heart hammering in her chest like a drum against her ribs. She stepped out of the hospital room, forcing herself to move calmly, to not run, to not let him see her fear. The moment she turned the corner, she gasped for air, her back hitting the cold white wall of the hallway. Her legs trembled beneath her, her entire body screaming at her to go back, to take Lila and run. But where? How? She had to think. Her mind scrambled for logic, for a plan, for something. She pulled out her phone again, her fingers moving quickly, swiping back to the video, watching it once more, even though her stomach clenched at the sound of his voice. The timestamp was minutes before she arrived. That meant Lila had been alive even then, which meant Adam knew. He had left her there, left her to die. Monica's breath came fast, shallow, but she forced herself to focus. She needed to move carefully. If Adam suspected that she knew, he could panic. He could finish what he started. She had to act like nothing had changed. She had to gather real evidence, something the police would believe, something stronger than a grainy recording and her gut-wrenching horror. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through her contacts, stopping on the only name she could think of: Detective Paul Reyes. They had worked together before, an old case where she'd helped a mutual client deal with a real estate fraud issue. She barely knew him outside of that, but she knew one thing: he was sharp, and he didn't ignore his instincts. She hit the call button. He picked up on the second ring. "Monica?" His voice was groggy but alert. "It's past midnight. What's wrong?" She swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep her voice steady. "Paul, I need your help. I think someone tried to kill my daughter." A pause. Then his voice sharpened. "Where are you?" "St. Mark's Hospital. Lila. She wasn't dead. They buried her alive, but she—" Monica's breath shuddered, the words barely forming. "She survived. But I think the man I trusted, Adam, I think he did this. I have proof, but I'm on my way." The line went dead. Monica's fingers tightened around the phone as she inhaled sharply, forcing herself to steady. She couldn't go back to Layla's room yet, not until Reyes arrived. She couldn't risk being alone with Adam. She stood in the hallway, the bright fluorescent lights casting long, sharp shadows against the walls. The hospital was quiet, eerie in its stillness, the low hum of machines the only sound. She tried not to think about how Adam was sitting beside Lila right now, his hands resting gently on hers, as if he hadn't buried her alive. Her stomach twisted. She heard footsteps approaching and straightened, bracing herself. But it wasn't Reyes. It was Adam. His expression was calm, unreadable, but his eyes studied her carefully. "You okay?" he asked softly. Monica nodded too quickly. "Yeah, I just needed some air." His head tilted slightly, his gaze lingering on her, assessing. "You sure?" She forced a smile, even as her fingers curled into her palms. "Yeah, just exhausted." Something flickered in his expression, something she couldn't place. But then he smiled, warm, reassuring, the same way he always did, the same way he had the night he convinced her that burying Layla quickly was the right thing to do. "Come back inside," he said, his voice gentle. "She might wake up soon." Monica hesitated for half a second, too long. His smile didn't falter, but something in his eyes darkened. Her heart pounded in her throat as she forced herself to nod and follow him, stepping back into the room, feeling the weight of his presence beside her. Layla was still unconscious, her breathing steady but weak. Monica moved toward her daughter, brushing a hand against her forehead, trying to calm her own shaken fingers. She could feel Adam watching her, his presence a shadow looming just behind. She needed to buy time, needed to act normal, needed to stay alive. The sound of heavy footsteps outside the door made her inhale sharply. Adam turned his head slightly, his body tensing in a way so small, so subtle, she almost missed it. Then the door pushed open, and Detective Reyes stepped inside. His eyes flicked between Monica and Adam, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Green," he said slowly, his tone neutral but firm. "Can we talk?" Adam's gaze darkened. Monica's fingers curled around Layla's hand. She wasn't alone anymore, and now Adam knew it. The room seemed to shrink, the air thickening into something almost solid as Detective Reyes stepped inside. His presence was sharp, cutting through the sterile hush of the hospital room. His eyes moved carefully, sweeping from Monica's pale, tear-streaked face to Adam, whose expression had frozen into something almost unreadable. Not shock, not confusion, but something colder, calculating. Monica felt Layla's frail hand under her own, her pulse a fragile flutter that grounded her against the rising tide of terror. She knew she had crossed an invisible line the moment Reyes entered. The world had shifted, and there was no going back. "Mrs. Green," Reyes said, his voice a low, measured weight in the silence. "I'm going to need you to step outside with me for a moment." Adam's body shifted just slightly, a subtle step forward that placed him between Monica and the door. His voice, smooth but tight, carried an edge of something that made Monica's skin prickle. "Detective, she's exhausted. Our daughter's fighting for her life, and this really isn't the time for questioning." Reyes's gaze didn't leave Adam, but there was steel in his reply. "This isn't questioning, it's a conversation." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But now that you mention it, I'd be happy to speak with you too, Mr. Carrick, separately." Adam's lips pressed into a thin line. "There's nothing to talk about." Monica's heart pounded, her pulse roaring in her ears. She saw it then, the shift, the moment Adam's warmth chilled into something else. His eyes, which had always been so soft when they looked at her, were hard now, assessing. Behind his concern, there was something sharp, something calculating, and she knew with bone-deep certainty that if she left the room, something terrible would happen. She spoke before Adam could. "I'm not going anywhere without my daughter." Her voice, raw and trembling, carried the kind of finality only a mother on the edge could summon. "If you have something to say, detective, you'll say it here, in front of him." Reyes's jaw ticked, but he nodded once, stepping fully into the room and closing the door behind him. His eyes flicked briefly to Monica, and something in their dark depths told her he understood. She was afraid, and she was right to be. "Fine," Reyes said, his tone shifting, hardening. "Mrs. Green, I came because of the call you made. You told me you had reason to believe your daughter's condition wasn't natural." His eyes slid to Adam, sharp and unblinking. "And that someone close to you may have been involved." Adam's voice cut through the air, cold and dangerous. "This is insane." He turned, his gaze locking onto Monica with a flash of something that made her stomach drop. "You're delirious from grief, Monica. You're not thinking straight." His voice softened, but the warmth in it was gone, leaving something hollow and sharp. "I know you're hurting, but this? Accusing me?" Monica's throat was tight, her body trembling, but she didn't break his gaze. "I saw the footage," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of a hammer. "From the bear. I heard your voice." The room seemed to go silent, the hum of machines fading beneath the sudden tension. Adam's expression stilled, a mask slipping into place. For a fraction of a second, something flickered behind his eyes, annoyance, calculation, before it vanished, replaced by a slow, almost pitying shake of his head. "Footage?" he echoed, his voice so careful, so smooth it felt like a blade's edge. "Monica, you're confused. There was no footage. I told you to rest. You're not well." But Monica felt the shift, the crack beneath his calm, and Reyes saw it too. "I'd like to see that footage," Reyes said evenly, his eyes pinned on Monica. "Now." Her hands were shaking so badly that it took 2 tries to unlock her phone. The room was so silent she could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She pulled up the recording, the one that had shattered her world, and pressed play. The grainy image filled the screen, a dim, shadowed view from inside the coffin, Lila's small, trembling hand, brushing of fingers against the camera, and then the voice, Adam's voice, soft, deceptively gentle, lethal. "You'll sleep now, little one. It's better this way. Just close your eyes." The recording ended, and so did the pretense. The shift in Adam was terrifying. The warmth was gone, stripped away, leaving something cold and feral. His body tensed, his jaw tightening as his eyes, those familiar, beloved eyes, turned to Monica with a darkness that made her blood run cold. For a fraction of a second, nobody moved. Then Adam did. Fast. His arm shot out, grabbing Monica's wrist, her phone clattering to the floor as he yanked her against his chest. She gasped, the breath crushed from her lungs as his other arm came up, locking around her throat in a vice. Reyes moved instantly, his gun clearing the holster, his voice sharp and thunderous. "Let her go now!" But Adam's grip only tightened, and Monica's fingers clawed at his arm, her throat burning, the room spinning. His voice, low and lethal, hissed into her ear. "You should have let it go, Monica. You should have trusted me." Her vision swam, her lungs burning for air, but she heard Reyes, his voice a razor in the storm. "You've got 3 seconds, Carrick. 3!" Adam's voice was ice. "If you shoot, she dies first." The machines around them wailed, Lila's heart monitor shrieking in alarm, the room a cacophony of chaos and fear. Monica's body thrashed, her vision blurring to darkness at the edges. But then, a sound. A voice. Small. Fragile. "Mommy?" Lila. Monica's body seized, every nerve screaming, every ounce of a mother's strength surging through her. Her elbow drove backward, hard into Adam's ribs. He grunted, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. A second was all she needed. She wrenched herself free, the world tilting, her body hitting the floor hard, gasping for air as she scrambled back away from him. Reyes's voice, a command and a threat, roared through the chaos. "Down! Now!" And then, a crack, the explosion of a gunshot. Adam's body jerked, his face contorting in shock, his knees giving way as he crumpled to the floor. The room roared back into sound. The alarms, the rush of footsteps, the shouts of nurses and officers flooding the space. But Monica heard none of it. She was already crawling, dragging herself across the cold tile to the hospital bed. To Lila, her daughter's eyes fluttering open, unfocused but alive. Monica's shaken hands cupped her face, her lips trembling as she sobbed out her daughter's name. "I'm here, baby. I'm here. I've got you. Mommy's got you." Layla's lips so dry barely moved, but her voice was the most beautiful sound Monica had ever heard. "You saved me." Monica's sob was raw, her body breaking and mending all at once. "Always," she whispered through her tears, her forehead pressed to Layla's, her voice a promise forged in blood and fire. "Always." Behind them, the chaos surged, the crash of footsteps, the bark of orders, the rasp of handcuffs snapping shut. But for Monica, the world had narrowed to one small hand, warm in hers. Her daughter, her everything. Alive. The hospital was quieter now, but the silence was different. It wasn't the suffocating, sterile hush that had weighed down the air when Monica thought she had lost everything. Now it felt fragile, like the first breath after holding it too long underwater. The soft, rhythmic beeps of Layla's heart monitor were the only sound Monica could hear, and with each one, she felt her own shattered heart pulling itself back together, piece by piece. Layla slept, her small chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. The bruises around her wrists from the IVs and the paleness of her cheeks made Monica's throat tighten, but she was here, warm under Monica's hand, alive. That was all that mattered. The events of the last hours still clung to Monica's skin, raw and jagged. Adam's voice in her ear, cold and venomous. The gunshot, his body hitting the floor. The way her own hands had bled as she reached for Layla, tearing through the chaos to get to her child. Reyes had stayed through the aftermath, his sharp eyes and clipped voice cutting through the noise as Adam was taken away, cuffs on his wrists and blood on his side. Attempted murder, fraud, insurance conspiracy. The charges would keep him behind bars for a lifetime, but no punishment would ever match what he had truly taken from her. Trust, safety. The door opened softly and Reyes stepped in, his face drawn but calm. He looked different in the soft hospital light, the hard lines of his expression softened by something close to exhaustion. "She's stable," Monica said quietly, her voice cracked from tears and strain. "The doctors said she's going to recover." Her hand, still trembling, brushed Layla's curls from her forehead. "I still don't know how she survived down there so long." Her voice wavered, and she turned to Reyes, her eyes dark with something beyond exhaustion. "If I hadn't—" She stopped, unable to finish. The what-if was too monstrous to name. Reyes's voice was steady, but laced with the gravity of the nightmare they had survived. "She's a fighter, like her mother." He paused, his eyes searching hers. The forensic team confirmed what you found. He drugged her. That's why the doctors couldn't find signs of trauma. It was a sedative. It slowed her heart, her breathing, just enough to make her seem gone. He hesitated, his jaw tightening before he continued, but he didn't count on the camera, or on you. Monica's hand, still in Lila's, clenched. Her voice was low, tight with the storm that still raged beneath her skin. "He said he loved us," she whispered, and the words tasted like ash. "But he buried my child alive." Reyes's voice was firm, cutting through the air like a line drawn in the earth. "And now he'll never hurt anyone again." Monica's breath shuddered out of her and her shoulders sagged. The fight, the terror, it was all crashing down at once. But there was something else beneath it. Something that felt dangerously like relief. Reyes's voice softened. "You were right to call me. I'm glad you did." Monica looked up at him, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt something unfamiliar at the edges of her shattered soul. Safety. "Thank you," she said, and the weight of those words carried everything she couldn't say. Reyes nodded, his lips tightening in something like understanding. "I'll be in touch. You rest. Be with her." The door clicked softly behind him, and the room returned to its fragile silence. Monica turned back to Lila, her thumb brushing over the back of her daughter's small hand. Slowly, Lila's eyelashes fluttered, and then her eyes, those beautiful warm eyes, opened, unfocused but searching. When they landed on Monica, a weak smile, barely more than a whisper across her lips, appeared. "Mommy." Lila's voice was soft, raw, but it was there. Monica felt her chest crack open with both agony and joy. I had a dream. I heard you calling me." Monica's throat closed and tears spilled, warm and endless, down her cheeks. She bent low, pressing her lips to her daughter's forehead, her voice trembling with everything inside her heart. "I never stopped," she whispered. "I never stopped calling. I never stopped looking. I found you, baby. I found you." Lila's fingers curled weakly around her mother's, and in that small squeeze, in that tiny warmth, Monica felt the entire world tilt back into its place. Days passed, and Lila grew stronger. Each step of her recovery felt like a miracle Monica couldn't stop holding tightly to, as if it might vanish if she looked away. The media swarmed, the story exploding into headlines. Mother's intuition saves daughter buried alive by boyfriend. Reporters called her a hero. Strangers online hailed her as a mother who defied death itself. But Monica didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a woman who had almost lost everything. On the third day, while Lila slept peacefully, Monica found herself standing by the hospital window, the sunrise painting the sky in soft golden threads. Her reflection stared back at her, tired and hollow-eyed, but alive. The police had returned her phone. The Bear camera, now infamous evidence, had recorded everything. The final piece that sealed Adam's fate. She should delete it. Every second of it was a scar. But her thumb hovered over the video file, and she hesitated. Her eyes drifted to Lila's sleeping form, her daughter's tiny chest rising and falling steadily. She pressed play. The screen flickered, and there it was, the coffin, the darkness, the muffled breaths. And then Lila's voice, so small, so brave. "Mommy!" And Monica's own scream through the speaker. The footage shook with the tremors of her digging, her voice cracking with desperation. "I'm coming, baby!" The sound of her hands clawing through earth. And then the gasping sob as the coffin opened, and Lila's voice, Mommy, you found me. Monica's knees hit the floor and the phone slipped from her fingers. She covered her mouth, her body shaken with sobs that felt like they were tearing her apart from the inside. But beneath the grief, beneath the horror, something else surged through her. Something bright, something fierce. Because she had found her, because she had saved her, because she never stopped fighting. The door creaked and Monica turned. Lila stood there, small and fragile in her hospital gown, her eyes wide and curious. Mommy, why are you crying? Monica's heart cracked and healed all at once. She opened her arms and Layla rushed into them, her tiny frame pressing tightly against her mother's chest. I'm crying, Monica whispered into her hair. Because you're here. Layla pulled back slightly, her small fingers wiping her mother's tears. You don't have to cry, she said softly. You found me. Monica's voice broke into a trembling smile. Yes, my sweet star, she whispered, her lips brushing Layla's forehead. And I always will. The sun rose higher, bathing them in its golden warmth. And for the first time in forever, the light didn't feel like a stranger. It felt like a promise, a new beginning. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Check out more of our videos for more thrilling stories, and don't forget to share this with your friends. See you next time.